Tonight's story is brought to you by FiendFX. FiendFX is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to helping charities with fundraising by providing them with the most innovative scarehouse and walkthrough events. They have created fully adaptive environments for the sensory sensitive so that everyone can enjoy the experience. For more information on FiendFX and their services, please visit them on the web at www.phoenfx.org. Without further ado, tonight's tale awaits you, right through there.
Welcome, my friends. Come, sit around the fire and let me spin another tale for your amusement. These tales, I tell you, these nightmares found only around the fireside, speak of many things, things which cannot be explained. Stories of the unknown, the unseen, and poorly understood. Some disturbing, yes, some terrifying, certainly. Stories of the darkness which reside in all of humanity, expressed in ways in which nature herself cannot account for, things beyond her ability and even beyond her comprehension, stories buried in time and hidden by shadow. Good evening. Tonight's story tells of the cursed Furisode in the modern day. A simple trip antiquing turns into one family's nightmare. One man's trash isn't necessarily another man's treasure. Let us continue with the second part of Warbroid, called simply Furisode. Warbride, Part 2, Furisode. Cynthia loved going to antique shops. Her husband Sean did as well, but for very different reasons. She loved to look and to shop for random items that caught her eye, and he loved old pocket knives, coins, jewelry, mostly rings, and whatever he thought would look pretty on Cynthia, and of course the occasional vintage comic. They would take a weekend once a month and have a date, antiquing, food, and if they could spare the time, an overnight stay. This had been the new routine since their youngest left for college a couple of years previously. He was set to return for the summer in a few days, and they took advantage of having the last few nights alone for a couple of months. Saturday was a short trip to Summerland, a town nearly 40 miles or so north from home, and was one of their favorite haunts. This place, a small seaside town, was known for its antique shops, historic homes, and quiet demeanor. It was a perfect little escape from Camarillo and their day-to-day commute into Newbury Park. It was peaceful and beautiful, and if they really wanted to, they could go a little north into the exceedingly affluent Montecito, or the less affluent but nonetheless expensive Santa Barbara, or they could stop in the little town of Carpinteria on the way home and enjoy a burger and fries at the Spot off of Linden Avenue. They had been to the antique shops on Lower State Street in Santa Barbara, and Carpinteria didn't have much along that vein, being more arts-centric these days, but Summerland rarely changed, and their favorite antique shop was calling to them. It wasn't a large antique shop, but Cynthia always found ways to get lost in it. Sean wasn't much better. Like most antique shops, the walls were covered in various portraits, pictures, and vintage paraphernalia of times gone by. Aisles were defined by glass-fronted showcases and shelving units filled with tastefully arranged displays of anachronistic wares, in all probability well overvalued. The owners were always up for a little haggling, but they rarely came down more than a couple of % off of the price. At most, it was usually enough to cover the sales tax, but that didn't matter to them. Sometimes they found things they wanted to take home. Most of the time, it amounted to an hour or more of wandering, immersed in the smells of history and lost in the aisles of reverie. They weren't looking for anything in particular. Many things caught their attention, but not long enough for them to open their wallets. Although the various wall hangings were of special interest to Cynthia, things change in these shops frequently, and most of the wall hangings weren't there the last time the two of them visited the shop. There were large maps of the world from the 1800s, beautifully framed prints of various well-known artists, Degas, Rubens, Da Vinci, and many original paintings from artists no one had ever heard of before. Landscapes of the old Santa Barbara Mission and the hills along highways 192 and 154 hung lackadaisically on the walls, with some having just enough dust on them to show that they had been there for a while. Seascapes abound and old photographs of the Santa Barbara, Summerland, and Carpinteria shorelines, back when they were covered in wooden piers and used to transport oil or lumber and replete with large cargo sailing vessels at the turn of the 20th century. There were also cloth hangings as well, rainbow-banded serapes, indigo-dyed ikat scarves, and a striking dark blue Japanese kimono with very long sleeves edged in orange, and with a white floral pattern at the bottom hem. It hung on a pole, suspended from the ceiling so that its arms were spread wide in such a manner to allow the long sleeves to hang without creases or folds. The orange silk at the sleeves' openings could easily be seen. The entire piece gave the air of being old, and it appeared a little faded about the shoulders. The tag simply described it as a dark blue and white Furisode of raw silk, early 1900s, $250. Cynthia fell in love with it. Sean was happy about the price. He hadn't found anything he wanted, and he wasn't sure where they were going to put the Furisode, but it was a pretty piece, and it made Cynthia happy. It left Sean a little uneasy for some reason, and the gentleman behind the counter seemed almost happy to have it gone. Though he folded it carefully as not to damage any further the origami crane sewn onto the back seam of the garment, he was reticent about touching it, and an almost imperceptible look of relief flashed across his eyes when the item was bagged and paid for. Imperceptible to Cynthia, but not to Sean. The couple meandered their way back down the coastline of the 101, with their windows down, smelling the fresh sea air until the freeway, or highway depending on what section of it you were on, cut into Ventura, past Oxnard, and then into Camarillo. Cynthia smiled the entire trip home. Sean always loved her smile. If there was one key to her innate beauty, one thing that made it come alive and put it on display for all to see, one thing that showed the world what he saw every minute of every day he was with her, it was that smile. He loved seeing it, and he fell in love with her a little more each time he did. They decided to find dinner closer to home. The restaurant wasn't anything special, but it was one they both liked, and they enjoyed their meal together. It was only a few minutes away from their home, and so their date ended more blissfully than it had begun. Their house was located in a newer development, a gated community near downtown Camarillo. Their home was on a street which featured 4 different styles of houses. The one they chose was a 2-story model with white plastered walls and a terracotta-style ceramic tile roof. It was flat-faced, with several double-hung white vinyl windows to break up the monotony of the design. The front door was offset from the center line, with a minimal arched overhang flanked by 2 Greek-inspired and entirely superfluous and out-of-place columns. This house seemed confused in its identity as to whether it was Greek Riviera or Mission-styled, and the architect, seemingly trying to combine the two, did so without much luck in doing it convincingly. The garage was a 2-car variety, with the standard garage door painted to match the rest of the outside and located at the rear of the house. The concrete driveway originated from a small alleyway which fed every house on the block and on both sides. This made it difficult at the end of the day when everyone was trying to return home and park their vehicles in their respective garages at the same time. On-street parking was only allowed by permit from the Homeowners Association. Their garage was devoid of unnecessary clutter, except for a tidy shelving unit which held some tools and some plastic bins for storage. A washer and dryer stood next to the door to the house, and a cabinet hung above it and contained all they would need to do laundry as well as other sundry cleaning supplies. Further along the back wall, a brand new smart water heater stood, quietly humming away, performing its assigned task. Her car was already parked in the garage when they arrived. He slid quietly up next to it. The automatic door closed behind them, and Cynthia collected her prize from the back seat before walking into their home. The internal garage door opened into a modern and equally as white kitchen. Every appliance in the kitchen that could be was of the smart variety. Their Echo device screen flickered on as they entered the code on their alarm panel to disable it before they had to field another phone call from the alarm company asking them if they were okay and needed help. The Echo device reminded them of their shopping list and then tried to entice them to play one of their favorite playlists. They simply ignored it as they walked past it on their way to the living room. Their living room, as well, was white, but more decorated than their kitchen. Instead of the normal family pictures on the wall, there were cabinets displaying their various finds from many years of antiquing. Glass front cabinets displayed with pride their trophies under LED lights, which were under the sole control of Alexa. She defaulted to the last color the couple had chosen. A pale blue light flickered on in each of the displays. Cynthia went immediately upstairs to the bedroom. The stairway hall is where one found their family photos, and that pictographical display spilled into the open landing area at the top of the stairs. Their bedroom, on the other hand, was of more typical adornments. A large king-size bed flanked on either side with end tables dominated the center of the room. The closet, spacious in design with built-in cabinetry and closet pulls, was located opposite to the entrance of the master bedroom. A glass door opening onto a small balcony was located to the right of the bed. All rooms in the house were of that same white treatment as the house, and were accentuated by either white-painted or light natural-colored wood accents. Cynthia placed her bag on the beige duvet on the bed and pulled her Furisode from it. She laid it carefully on the bed and brushed out any creases or fold marks she may have taken notice of. Going to the closet, she found a suitably heavy enough coat hanger and walked back into the bedroom. She lifted the Furisode gently and placed it on the hanger before walking back into the closet. She stopped before the full-length mirror as she entered the closet. For a moment, she stared at her reflection and then held the Furisode up to herself. The dark blue complemented her, not as natural as it once was, blonde hair. Her eyes were a lighter shade of blue than that of the garment, but it didn't matter to her. It was still beautiful, and she thought that she would look beautiful in it. She put the thought away for a later time. She hung the Furisode in the closet and failed to notice that the origami crane sewn to the back had begun to fall apart. That night, Cynthia slept comfortably well. Sean was plagued by troublesome dreams of wars and fighting and death. Screams permeated throughout his dreams, and once they were loud enough to wake him up. On that occasion, he left the bed and walked into the bathroom to splash some water on his face. The tortured and terrified screams from his nightmares still echoed in his ears as he turned off the faucet. Instinctively, he turned his head, looking out of the bedroom and into the closet. He saw the Furisode hanging there. It was the only thing he saw in the closet, and he found it unnerving. He walked over to the closet and closed the door. Returning to bed, he found his wife fast asleep, with a slight smile on her lips. He kissed her gently and returned to his side. The sheets in his pillow were cold and damp with sweat. Sleep was long in returning, and when it finally did, his nightmares continued until dawn. It was a typical Sunday in modern suburbia. They awoke early, laying in bed together until necessity forced them from its comfortable confines. They rose, showered, and dressed in comfortable clothing not necessarily meant to be seen outside the home. They had a breakfast of eggs, spinach and feta sausage, and French toast, complemented with the gourmet coffee they found in Trader Joe's. Cynthia enjoyed her fresh orange juice from Sprouts. Sean passed on a glass of it, preferring his coffee instead. With breakfast finished, they washed the dishes and made shopping lists, that which could not be ordered from Amazon. They tidied the house and changed their clothes into something more presentable to the neighborhood. While changing, Sean spied the Furisode again. It made him uneasy and brought back memories of the hard night's sleep and the unrelenting night terrors. He was happy that Cynthia preferred to dress in the closet, which left very little room for him to dress in there as well, forcing him to dress in the bedroom proper. It was unusually warm for this time of year, even in Southern California. The typical June gloom had dispelled well before 10 a.m., leaving a scorcher of a day ahead of them. They ran their errands, leaving the perishable shopping for the last. It was too warm for the farmer's market, and anyways, it closed early on a Sunday so the veggies would wilt before they could get them home. So, regular market produce would have to do. With errands finished, they returned to suburbia to finish the evening and prepare for the work week, and the return of their son William from college. Cynthia prepared an early dinner with several glasses of their favorite red wine, and after, they settled down in the family room on their beige couch. She turned the smart TV from displaying her favorite Monet, The Water Lily Pond, to Netflix. They found a few shows, and then the threat of the alarm clock the next morning lured them to bed. They faced another work week, and William would be returning to them on Tuesday. The sheets were cool, and Sean found himself falling asleep almost immediately, leaving Cynthia to read a bit before bed. She was not nearly as tired as her husband. The book she was reading, one of many Nora Roberts novels she kept by her bedside, wasn't holding her attention as it normally did. She rose from the bed and walked into the bathroom. To her right side, the closet door was open, and she caught a glimpse of herself in the full-length mirror. She thought she looked pretty good for being almost 50. She was still strong, with little wrinkling and less sagging in the vital places. She was still firm and in good shape. She stepped into the closet to look at herself more closely, closing the door behind her so the closet light wouldn't disturb her husband. He certainly hadn't slept well the night before, and she didn't want to be responsible for another night of disturbed sleep before work. Mondays in the high-tech industry were replete with coffee, bad attitudes, and call-outs. Her hand brushed the Furisode. Electric joy spread through her body at its touch, and she turned to look at it. Silk wasn't a fabric she was used to, and she found its feel against her skin desirable. So she ran her hand over the garment. The silk of the outer shell felt heavy and thick, but the lining was smooth, luxuriously so, like some of her satin negligées, but different. She couldn't decide what it was that was different, only that it felt different, and she knew she liked the feel of it. But she also knew tomorrow, in a few short hours, would be another workday. The medical lab she worked in would not be so forgiving if she showed up late because she spent the night fondling a robe. She returned to bed. Her husband lay asleep on the other side. She could see he was sweating, and he was unusually active, with jerking arm movements and restless legs. She hoped he was okay. Sean was not okay. His dreams, his night terrors had increased in both intensity and clarity. He could read the names and numbers on the sides of the planes. He could hear radio chatter from the cockpit. He felt the hard landing and sudden braking of the fighter on the rolling tarmac. He felt the blast winds, the burning of his skin, and renting of his clothes from his body. He woke up screaming. She woke with him, but hers were peaceful dreams, dreams of comfort and happiness. She felt insulated from the world, and to her, that wasn't a terrible state to be in. Her dreams had left her happy until she heard her husband scream. He had sat upright in bed, breathing hard and eyes glazed over. She hesitated momentarily, and then she headed downstairs. She poured him a couple of fingers of bourbon and returned. She handed the drink to him, and as he recognized her, his breathing slowed to a normal pace. He took the bourbon and drained the glass. He put it on his bedside table and laid back down. She wrapped her arms around him, and they both fell back to sleep. They both managed to sleep through the rest of the abbreviated night. He awoke before the alarm and climbed into the shower. She left the bed and laid out her clothes. The touch of the Furisode against her skin was no less exciting as the night before, and she hatched a little plan for this evening to help her husband sleep better. Her day, filled with plans and schemes for her and her husband that night, helped her throughout the monotony of a Monday in the labs. Mounds of paperwork, glassware which needed to be tested before it could be used, some sent back for rewashing, others went directly into the autoclave for sterilization and then into storage. Inventory of the necessary elements prior to the next big project, ordering, categorizing, initialing each of the thousands of pieces of paper, all of these things would drive her to points of madness on a Monday. Today, she was distracted with what to make for dinner, and what wine she could pick up before coming home, and with her plans for the Furisode hanging in the closet tonight. His day was no different. Deadlines, insane amount of time in front of the computer, lunch off the food trucks, more time lost in AutoCAD hell. Today, though, was punctuated with fits of anxiety he hadn't felt in some time. He took more of the CBD gummies he had hidden in his desk than he should have. And when he had calmed down enough to focus, the fatigue resultant from the tormenting nightmares the night before would creep up on him, and he would have to hunt for strong coffee just to be able to keep focused. An hour would go by, and the cycle would begin again. By the end of the day, he felt entirely burnt out and very much looking forward to being home. His only respite was the teasing text messages he would get throughout the day from his wife. She wasn't normally like this, but he needed the encouragement that those random messages brought, and that got him through what was a particularly difficult day. The commute home was sultry, and the sun beat through the windshield with such radiance he was reminded of the nightmares he experienced the night previous. But it didn't matter. The AC blew strong throughout his sedan, keeping him cooler, and the almost illegal tint on his windows and the polarized coating on the windshield helped him with the glare. Cynthia was able to leave work early, and so she set her plans into motion. Dinner was in process. That very nice bottle of wine had been procured, and the rest of the evening lived only in her imagination, her schemes waiting patiently to be brought into fruition. It was going as she wished it to. Sean had come home and she had greeted him warmly. He responded, though he appeared and acted exhausted, in kind. She had changed into a simple white t-shirt with no bra and a pair of loose-fitting, soft flannel shorts. He had gone upstairs to strip off his work clothes while she took dinner from the oven and plated it. Dinner had been perfect, and the wine she chose was a perfect compliment. Some life came back into her husband during dinner, and after he seemed almost his old self. He helped clear the table and the dishes, and when they had finished, she suggested that they retire early to bed. He put up no resistance to the idea. She had already darkened the bedroom, though some light still creeped in through the drawn blinds. It was comfortably cool in the room when Sean sat heavily upon the mattress. Cynthia kissed him, told him to wait, and slipped into the closet. She stripped off her clothes and stood naked in front of the full-length mirror. She took a moment to admire her reflection, those perky breasts, her round bottom, and her slim figure. Without looking, she reached for the Furisode and brought it to her as she did the night before. She admired, once again, the color of it against her skin, though now, without her bed shirt and panties, she could see the colors play off the variations of her skin tone. It looked even more beautiful than it did before, and she was sure Sean would love it. She slipped an arm into one of the sleeves, and the smooth silk of the lining tickled her skin. Slipping the other arm in revealed a luxury of sensation she hasn't experienced before. The silk was smooth and cool against her skin, caressing it with every slight shift of the garment. The weight of the Furisode carried beautifully across her shoulders, bringing comfort and even a feeling of safety, much like being wrapped in a warm blanket during a thunderstorm. The sleeves seemed light as a feather and even fluttered in the air currents from the HVAC return in the top of their closet, and everywhere the silk touched her bare skin inspired goosebumps and aroused excitement. All she wanted now was to be with her husband. He was on the bed when she left the closet in the Furisode, breathing comfortably and dressed in nothing. He smiled as she appeared at the foot of the bed. The Furisode, not having a tie or belt at the waist, hung straight on her, giving playful glimpses of her cleavage and her manicured blossom. She placed a hand on his foot and traced the line of his leg up to his thigh. Visibly excited, he reached out and touched the sleeve of the Furisode. The silk seemed rough to him, almost harsh, but those sensations were drowned out by other, more pleasurable ones as her hand continued its soft and sensual path. She leaned down and kissed him, slowly and passionately at first, and as his hand moved from her sleeve to her chest, she slid her body on top of his. She woke suddenly. The room was dark and she was still wearing the Furisode. It seemed to her to be constrictive now, and she felt tangled in it. She reached over for her husband and found he was not with her in bed. She sat up and looked around. It was only a few seconds before her eyes adjusted fully and saw her husband standing at the entrance of the closet. He stood there, swaying gently. Cynthia called for him to return to bed. He did not answer. She asked him if he was okay. He did not answer. She swung her legs over the side of the bed when she caught a glimpse of movement in front of him. She turned to look at him and froze. Two thin hands with long, sharp nails reached out for her husband and anchored themselves into the flesh of his shoulders. They jerked him forward, and then a thin, decidedly Japanese, but something more from the anime they watched than the typical Tokyo inhabitants, and pale. Her hair was long and black, unbrushed and hanging heavily from her head. The kimono sleeve which framed the hand was white, with splatters of red at the opening. Her eyes were mere slants, as if she was concentrating on Sean, following each line, each crease in his sleep-deprived face. And the light which emanated from the eyes was white, luminescent, and unsettling. It was bright enough to dully illuminate her husband's face. He showed no signs of fear or of any emotion, or of any inkling of what was going on. He seemed asleep for having his eyes wide open. Cynthia screamed, and the creature disappeared quickly back into the darkness, taking Sean with it. Adrenaline dumped into Cynthia's body, and before she was aware, she was on her feet. She walked furtively towards the closet opening. Fear surged through her body as she approached, but she needed to understand what had happened and where her husband was. Slowly, cautiously, she rounded the corner to the opening of the closet. It was empty, and all she could see was the full-length mirror on the opposite side. A thin white hand in a white and red splattered kimono sleeve reached through the darkness. The nails of the hand sunk into the flesh around Cynthia's face, and with a single swift maneuver, Cynthia was yanked from the silk of the Furisode and into the darkness. The dark blue and white Furisode, with orange silk at the sleeve openings, fell to the ground. The remnants of the old paper crane, once sewn to the back seam of the garment, now resided in pieces in the bed. William sat on his parents' couch in his parents' living room with his phone in his hand. They weren't home when he arrived. They didn't answer their cell phones when he texted and called. His messages to both of them were left unread through their social media accounts. His calls to their employers revealed that neither had been to work today, and so now he sat on the couch waiting for the police to arrive.
Tonight's episode of Fireside Nightmares was sponsored in part by Everbright Solutions. When you need your lighting display done by professionals and done right, Everbright Solutions is there for you. Find them on Instagram at Everbright_Solutions_LLC and also by Redicus. Redicus is a leading cross-border e-commerce enterprise with a diverse product lineup including service calling systems, guest pager systems, tour guide systems, window intercom systems, conference devices, FM transmitters, and radios. Find them online at www.retekess.com. Be sure and listen in next time for the newest installment of Fireside Nightmares. These original short stories, based on folklore, urban legends, and the odd, demented flight of fantasy, are sure to entertain and terrify. From all of us at Fireside Nightmares and FiendFX, good night.